Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we are conducting an autopsy, but we're not looking at a person. No, we are dissecting a catastrophic political failure. We're going to be looking deeply at an absolutely fascinating historical account from the War of Crowns, specifically Chapter 93, to break down an event known as the Lesser Shield. Now, as a historian, I've got to tell you I find this text completely gripping. Why? Because it maps out, step by excruciating step, how human hubris, when you mix it with a kind of creeping systemic terror, leads directly to total institutional collapse. It's like a giant puzzle where every piece is a bad decision. We are going to explore exactly how a civilization, in a completely desperate bid to protect its own political pride, misdiagnosed a massive existential threat and just willingly opened its front gates to a tyrant. Okay, let's dive right into this with a quote from our primary historical witness. This is an observer named Ilian Mar. He wrote, "Better a shield that knows it can break than chains pretending to be protection." Now, this isn't just some dramatic, poetic statement to kick things off. This is literally the core thesis of our entire explainer today. Mar's words serve as the ultimate warning against this deeply, deeply human tendency to trade our actual freedom for just a false sense of security. As you'll see as we go through this, the officials in the city of Raum built themselves a defense mechanism that didn't just fail to protect them, it actually, actively prepared them to be conquered. To understand exactly how this all went down, here is our roadmap. We're going to start with the illusion of safety, look at the hubris of their initial misdiagnosis, cover the building of the Lesser Shield, see how Ilian Mar exposes the truth, track the collapse of their institutions, and finally, discuss trading freedom for fear. All right, Section 1, the illusion of safety, the terror with no shape. Let's look at how this completely unprecedented crisis actually started in the city of Aldiram. Before we get into the terror itself, we need to make sure we clearly define what we mean by the Lesser Shield. Because, look, if you're imagining some glowing, magical force field projected over a city wall, actually, scratch that. Throw that image completely away. The Lesser Shield was a catastrophic historical error. It was a deeply flawed, incredibly paranoid political strategy. This was the exact moment that humanity decided to outsource its protection to lesser, hidden, and completely unaccountable entities. And they did it simply because they were too terrified to face the true, higher systemic threat knocking at their door. So by trying to secure their own power, they literally hit the accelerator on their own institutional collapse. Moving on to Section 2, Hubris and the Misdiagnosis, Expectation versus Reality. This brings us right to the fatal flaw of Valderam's high ministers, their own massive pride. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer absolute delusion of the government officials. Look at the stark contrast between what they wanted to see and what was actually standing right in front of them. The ministers expected your classic textbook monstrous threat, right? Hoof prints, the smell of sulfur, smashed windows in the night. They wanted a minor manipulator, basically a low-ranked demon they could bully around, bribe, or bargain with to feel powerful. But the reality was Belial. Belial was a higher crown. He was a king who brought what the text calls clean terror. He wore courtly skin. He spoke in these polite, perfectly measured sentences. He didn't come to break down the doors. He simply walked right through them and began quietly rewriting the city's authority from the inside out. He possessed this absolutely terrifying ability to make authority sound like mercy and make chains feel like gifts. And because Belial was just so clean and polite about it, the officials completely misunderstood him. The terror didn't start with slaughter in the streets. No, it started with systemic administrative breakdown. Judges would sit at the bench and just forget the endings of their verdicts. Generals were suddenly signing orders they had no memory of writing.
Vital contracts were being sealed by invisible hands. It was literally the ultimate administrative nightmare. Now, this systemic breakdown was massive, but the officials' fragile pride, it just couldn't accept that they were entirely outmatched by a goetic king. There was no way. So, to protect their own egos, they just decided to believe they were dealing with a minor, manageable haunting. And guys, that single, arrogant misdiagnosis became the very first stone pulled out of a collapsing wall.
Which brings us to Section 3, Building the Lesser Shield, the bureaucracy of fear. Because they convinced themselves the enemy was small, they looked for a small solution. So, the officials gathered together in what basically became a council of human fear. In a panic, they decided to hire lesser demons, entities they had secretly used in the past, to build this so-called shield. Just consider the absolutely absurd bargains they struck here. Shax offered to confuse the enemy, right? Sounds great, but the hidden cost was a total loss of transparent communication in the city. Raum offered to expose corrupt treasurers, but that instantly seeded this pervasive, toxic paranoia everywhere. Halphas inspired the building of new watchtowers, which was literally just oppressive surveillance disguised as public security. Crocell warmed the city wells, which just lulled everyone into blind complacency. And Decarabia, he provided early warnings via birdsong. But the warnings were so vague they just generated constant, uninterpretable anxiety. It was exactly like getting a super vague, threatening corporate email from HR every morning. They were trying to treat a massive systemic infection with dirty, bureaucratic bandages.
And here is the most devastating irony of the entire historical account. Belial didn't even try to fight this lesser shield. He absolutely did not need to. He just stood back, crossed his arms, and watched during the Festival of Restored Order as the humans cheered for their new watchtowers and their warm wells. You see, Belial understood a really dark truth. A ruler who depends on secret power becomes infinitely easier to govern from the shadows. The human officials entirely stopped relying on evidence, wisdom, or debate. Instead, they began frantically consulting omens and borrowed demonic power before making every single human decision. The cure they chose was perfectly preparing the patient for the disease. The shield itself was literally teaching humanity how to kneel.
All right, on to Section 4. Aelian Mar exposes truth, the historian's toolkit. Enter our primary source witness, the one guy capable of cutting through the political spin.
So the crucial point we need to look at is how exactly Aelian Mar diagnosed this collapse when no one else could. Mar arrived at Valdarum carrying borrowed powers of his own, but, and this is key, he didn't use them to cast fireballs or fight monsters. He used them as the ultimate diagnostic toolkit of a master historian. He had Vassago's ability, which let him see what the officials were actively refusing to look at. He used Paimon's discipline to actually hear the rigid structure hiding beneath all that administrative chaos. He wielded person sense to dig up the secrets the government was desperately trying to bury. And most importantly, he felt Andromalius's ache. That's this visceral, gut-level realization of when a society is deliberately misnaming control and calling it justice. Using these analytical tools, Mar looked at Belial once and he immediately knew they weren't dealing with a minor haunting, he was looking at a king.
So, armed with this knowledge, Mar marched straight up to the proud ministers. And what did they do? They politely laughed right in his face. They pointed to their recovered letters, they pointed up at their shiny new watchtowers, and they arrogantly claimed, "Look around, Mar. Our contacts have contained the threat." But Mar, looking right past their whole illusion of safety, delivered this stark, chilling reality check. He looked at the towers specifically designed to make the citizens feel watched, and he answered, "No, they have contained you." He realized that the lesser shield wasn't some grand fortress holding Belial out. Not at all. It was a prison locking the humans in.
This takes us to Section 5, The collapse of institutions, administered by anxiety. Because what happens when you tell a paranoid government their security is a lie? They double down.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because the speed of this collapse is just terrifying. On day 1, we get that first administrative hesitation we talked about. By day 3, the completely panicked council proposes building the lesser shield. Day 7, they're already throwing a parade, the Festival of Restored Order, declaring a premature victory. But watch this. By day 9, the officials are so spun out and terrified that they actually beg for more secret surveillance. The city devolves from being defended by spirits to being totally, 100% administered by anxiety. And then, day 10 hits, the night of false rescue. During a Treasury court meeting, Belial finally makes a move and locks the officials in a room. And what do their lesser demon protectors do? They try to help by strengthening the locked doors and stealing the humans' voices so they can't scream, effectively paralyzing and trapping the humans perfectly. It was a flawless demonstration by Belial, proving that human authority was entirely, completely useless.
It was right there, in that trapped, silent room, that Ilian Mar finally spoke the hard truth out loud. He said, "You are standing before a king." And the second they heard his true rank, the lesser demon's powers just withered instantly. They knew they had been hiding Belial's rank the whole time just to protect their own little petty bargains. And how do you think the human officials reacted when their precious shield broke? Did they suddenly take responsibility for their hubris? Absolutely not. No way. Their gratitude curdled immediately into this vicious, humiliated anger. Embarrassed and utterly terrified, the officials launched violent purges. But here's the kicker. They didn't go after the king. They went after the lesser demons, the clerks, the singers, the builders. Their fear desperately needed a smaller, reachable throat to punish because they were far too cowardly to face the massive systemic failure that they themselves had engineered.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, Trading Freedom for Fear, the Modern Parallel. Because history is really only just a story, unless we apply its lessons to our own world.
What we've just mapped out together today is an absolute universal blueprint for systemic collapse. Step 1. Political leaders completely misdiagnose a massive threat simply because admitting its true size would hurt their pride. Step 2. In a panic, they outsource their defense to hidden, completely unaccountable entities. I mean, think about modern parallels here. Secret mass surveillance programs, or relying entirely on unchecked black box algorithmic advisors to make policy decisions. Step 3. This lack of transparency creates a massive feedback loop of paranoia, which just drives escalating fear-based policies. And finally, Step 4. The population, who is now totally exhausted by the constant anxiety of their own protections, willingly surrenders their last remaining autonomy to literally anyone who steps up and offers simple order.
And that brings us to the ultimate climax of the historical account. After the officials are trapped and humiliated, Belial doesn't attack Valdarum with an invading army. He doesn't need to. He just steps forward, playing the part of the sorrowful, patient ruler, and he offers to stabilize their broken city. He offers to organize all their messy human fear into neat, clean order. And the exhausted, terrified human officials, they actually lean toward him. They are so desperate for relief. But Ilian Mar cuts in and asks Belial one final devastating question. When your order arrives, who keeps the right to say no? Belial just smiles at him. And in that moment, the officials finally hear the silence. It is, as the text brilliantly describes it, the chilling silence of a door with literally no handle on the inside.
So, what does this all mean for us? The Lesser Shield collapsed, not because it was defeated in some grand battle, but because it was exposed as entirely fundamentally useless against a higher crown. It only served to prepare the human soul to accept even heavier chains.
And that leaves us with an absolutely critical, urgent question to ponder as we look at the bureaucratic and administrative structures around us right now. Where in our modern systems are we doing exactly this? Where are we currently trading away our own freedom, our transparency, and our autonomy, all for the mere illusion of safety? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning those shields being built around you, and I'll see you next time.